Thanks.
Okay, Tov, today's daf is Daf Lamed in Avodah Zarah. We learn for Achenu basis for Sunnah Tzar B'Shivya. Also, we learn for the Ilu Neshama of Irving Alter's mother, whose yahrzeit is today. We're up to about 10 lines down on the page. We'll pick it up from Rabbi Rab Yosef, maybe 8 lines down. Rabbi Rab Yosef, Yayin Mozik Ein Bo Mishum Gilui. If you have diluted wine, there's no concern about the snakes, because the snakes don't like diluted wine, they like strong wine. Yain mavushal ein b'mushum yain nesach. And cooked wine, there's no problem with yain nesach. That we still have today, right? We pretty know that if you have yain mavushal, there's no problem with nisach. Okay, with the being concerned that a guy libated it, used it in offering for avodah zarah. Yiboilu yain mavushal yesh b'mushum gilui. What about yain mavushal? Is there a problem with gilui or not? With exposed wine, meaning you're worried about snakes. With yain mavushal, we said, Rabbi Yosef said that yain mozik, there's no problem with snakes, yain mozik, but mavushal, there's no problem with nisach. What about mavushal with gila? You worried about exposed yain b'mishum gili? Tashma, let's bring a proof. Hey, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, al yain mavushal shein b'mishum gili. He said, when it comes to yain mavushal, there's no problem with exposed. As we'll see later on, the halacha is that when it comes to yain mavushal, you're not worried about goyim, you're not worried about snakes. Okay, when it comes to that's with yain mavushal. When it comes to exposure, when it comes to yayin that's been exposed, that is a problem. But we'll talk about whether it applies today or not. Rav Yanai bar Yishmael's story. Rav Yanai bar Yishmael got with challah. She was sick. Remember his name, Rav Yanai bar Yishmael. All the Gabar Rav Yishmael ben Zirud. Rav Yishmael went to visit him for Abana and the other rabbis Shiur to inquire after his health. Yesterday they were sitting becoming boil and they asked this question. Yain mavushal yesh b'mishum gili and mishum gili. What about this question? This very question we just said. Yain mavushal. Is there a problem if it's exposed? Is it a snake problem or not? We'll call it a snake problem. Amar lahu. Amir Shmuel ben Zerus, Shmuel, who had led the rabbis there. Hachiyam Rav Shimon Lakish. This is what Rav Lakish said. Mishum Gavram, in the name of a great rabbi, Imanu Rav Chia. He said the name of Rav Chia, who was Rav's uncle. Yain mavushal ein bo mishum gili. There's no problem if you have yain mavushal. There's no problem. There's no problem with exposure with snakes when it comes to yain mavushal. Again, not only do they not drink mixed wine, as we said, right? Diluted wine, right? We said yain mozik. There's no problem, but they don't drink diluted wine. They don't drink. The snakes don't stick their venom into cooked wine either. Into cooked wine. That's what he said. Amalei nismo. Can we rely on that? So at this point, the sick one, Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Shmuel, who went to visit, apparently he couldn't talk. He was so sick. Mechavilu, but he showed them. He sort of, gesticulated. He showed it with his face or with his hands. He says, alive al savai, on me. You can rely on me. Yes, I agree with that. Yain mavushal, there's no problem with exposure. Again, we'll talk about the halacha later on. Shmuel, another story. Shmuel the Ivlat. Ivlat was a guy, but he was a well-versed guy. You find him many times in the Gemara that Shmuel, we find him that he was close to the king. They had relationships with different goyim. So Shmuel Evlat Haviyasvi, they were sitting. They brought in front of them some cooked wine. He took his hand away as if to show, oh, I know, like you have many goyim today who work for the Jews. They know that they're not supposed to touch the wine, right? They know, like they let the Jew open up the bottle, etc. So he pulled his hand back. There's no problem. It's mavushal. So there's no problem if you could touch it. And Rashi says, you see from over here that there's no problem even with drinking. We talked about hana, right? You're allowed to have hana. We'll talk about that at the end also, right? But you can't even, there's no problem with yain nesach. If it's the real yain nesach, you can't even have hana. It's also like a mess. It's also like a carbon. You can't even have hana from it. There's problem here. The yain nesach, you can even, if it's mavushal, there's no problem. It's not yain nesach, even to the point of being able to drink it. Amsid Rav Chia's maidservant, igluye le hahu chamra. She had left some wine that was exposed. Okay, there was a problem. But what kind of wine? Mavashla. It was cooked wine. Also coming to she came for Chia. She said, "Listen, I found some exposed wine." She was honest and she said, "Look, what should we do with it?" There's no problem with snakes. When it comes to yain vushal, there's no problem with snakes. As we'll see, no problem of snakes and no problem of yain nesach. Shammai to Rav Bar, another story with Rav Bar's servant, Igul Chamra Meziga. He had not some exposed, right? He had not some mavushal wine that was exposed, but some diluted wine that was exposed. Amarlei That's what they said. They said that diluted wine, there's no problem with exposure to snakes. So again, apparently so far we've seen that there's no snake problem when it comes to either exposed wine or cooked wine. That's what we've seen so far. Rav Papa said, that's only if it's very diluted. Put a lot of wine in it. Here Rashi says that mazik is 2 parts water to 1 part wine. We've seen other places where it's 3 parts water to 1 part wine. I guess it depends on how strong the wine is or different shitas. But he says that's only if it's really diluted. If it's only diluted a little bit, then Shasi, the animals, the snakes do drink it. And you're worried about sticking they're putting their venom in there. We'll see later on, I'll mention, I think I brought it, that Bisman Hazeh, it's almost unheard of. Nobody has snakes coming into their house or crawling around. It's very rare. They have a lot of snakes in the wooded areas around here. They're small snakes that usually they have to catch them. Cats eat the snakes, but there's really not a problem with snakes crawling. You're finding a snake in your house and he maybe put his head into the water, whatever. So still, you got to be careful. Of a mazik below mazik shasi, he says, listen, if it's only diluted a little bit, they do drink it. Says Gemara, mazik below mazik shasi, they drink it. For Rabba, but I'll show you that they don't drink even if it's a little bit diluted. They don't drink it. Rabba Rafuna, because of Abra, he was on a boat. He had some wine with him. He saw a snake that Sarivasi was racing through the water. The snake was racing through the water to get at his cup of wine. Right? Amalei the Shami told his servant, Sami Dain, knock out his eye, blot out his eye. What did he mean by that? He didn't mean literally try to catch the snake. He said make the snake turn around. In other words, make him repel the water. Put the wine in such a state that the snake won't be interested in it. So do that to him. Shaku Kalima, he took a little bit of water, Shadabay, and he put it into the wine. The snake turned around and left. So what do you see? That even a little bit of dilution, just put a little bit of water in there, turned away. Says no. If it's raw wine, meaning undiluted wine, then he'll risk his life. The snake is so enticed by it, he'll risk his life, to get that wine. He drinks diluted wine. He's just not going to risk his life for it. It was only diluted a little bit, even a little bit. He's not going to risk his life for it, but he still drinks it if it's that, right? What are you talking about? Even on a diluted wine, he won't risk his life. For Rav Yana have a bechbur. Rav Yana was in that place called Achbure. Amla Rav Hadaya have a bechbur. Some say it was Hadaya was there. Have a Yosfe, they were sitting. Have a Kashasu Chamra Mesiga. They were drinking some diluted wine. Pashlu Chamra Bakubat. Some was a little bit was left over in the barrel, in the jug. A little bit of wine was left over. Bitsarnui Bafranuka. So what did they do? They left. There was a little one left over. They didn't want a snake to get in. They didn't want anything to get contaminated. So they covered it up with a cloth, right? Some sort of a shroud or cloth. They covered it up so the animal, nothing, flies wouldn't get in there. They saw a snake. The shakalmaya. I don't know what kind of snake is this. There are different kinds of snakes, big snakes, who took some water. The snake, right? There was a little bit of wine left over in the jug. So the snake came, brought some water and filled up the jug, right? Until the jug was filled. And that made the wine rise up. Of course, it was diluted because he was putting water in there, rise up. The solid kamra eluya parunka, and the wine rose up. The water level of the liquid rose up above the cloth. V'shasi, and he drank it. So you see the extent that a snake would go to drink even diluted wine. Amri, so they said no. Demazik iyu shasi. If he mixed it himself here, if the snake mixed it himself like he did here, that he'll drink. The mazik achrina lo shasi. But if somebody else mixed it, he won't drink it. And we're trying to prove. Because Rav Papa said it's only if it's very diluted, but if it's a little diluted, he won't drink it. Here you see cases where I guess he says, well, he's not going to moser nefesh for it, but still you see the Gemara's question was, he's not going to look at the extent that the snake did just to drink a little bit of diluted wine, even if it's very diluted. So they say, well, that's only if he diluted himself. Amar Vashi v'tember masharsha. Some say piruka l'sakanta. You're giving now trying to give an answer. That, well, if he mixed it himself, he'll drink it for which is really a sakanas nefashos. We have a klal in Shas that what? Amira sakanta mi'isura. Taking a chance on something which is dangerous is worse than an isur. This is your sakonas nefashos. If they drink the venom, you might die. So he didn't agree with that. Now, therefore, you could say it's almost therefore, Rava, who was the later posek of the Amoram, he said, Hilchasa, here's the halacha, yain mozeg yesh ba mishum gilui. Even if it's diluted, you got to be concerned about snakes. V'yesh ba mishum yain nesach. And if it's diluted, there's yain nesach too. I mean, all the wine that we drink today is diluted. We don't have any wine here. Nobody comes and mixes wine unless you make your own wine in the bathtub in your house or something. You don't make your own wine. The wine that you buy in the bottles is diluted wine. So he says, yain mozek, there's concern about exposure, and there's concern about yain mavushal, like yain mavushal, there's no concern, ein mishum gulik, because they don't drink yain mavushal if it's cooked. Ein mishum yain nesach, concern yain nesach. But still, you see that. So here it seems to be that the halacha is that that diluted wine, there is concern about exposure. There's concern about yain nesach we have today. However, the Mepharshim say, the poskim say, "She'ata ein choshishim legilin kamosenu." In our lands, and I guess in the West, if you might call that, she'ein nechoshim mitzvim. They're not here. However, v'ulam yesh machmirim v'tivei pishita sagra. There are machmirim about it, right? Still, the Chazonish was very careful. V'hikbed al-tev 11 megula. Okay, I don't, they're very makbid about megula today. Even if you have a cup of water in your house, you're not really about snakes so much, but a fly might get in there, a mosquito or something like, anything can get in there. So you have to be concerned about it, but it's really not a concern about snakes of the Isser and such an Isser when it comes to that. But that's his psak. Now, another story. Shammai, Rav Shilkiah bar Tuvei, Igle Ha'u Kasta Demaya, there was some sort of a receptacle, a tank or something, it's cast in that place. That was their measure or their container, and it was exposed. And he was sleeping next to it. In other words, the servant had left open a tank or a barrel of wine, of water rather. This is water. It wasn't wine. It was water. Our concern is really they'll drink any liquid. Our concern is maybe they don't drink. We said yain bevishal they don't drink, but apparently water and strong wine they drink. So this is water. But he was sleeping next to this barrel, this tank. Also, he said, "What should I do?" Came to Rav Shilkiah bar Tuvei. Amalei Harayami said, "Amos yashan aleim." People say that the snake is afraid of even of a man who's sleeping there. So therefore, if you were sleeping there, you don't be concerned about the water being exposed. That's only during the day. But at night, they'll sneak in anyway. That's what he told them. We're at the first of the widest lines near the bottom of the Gemara now. Below, that's not the case. It doesn't make any difference day or night. We don't say that. In other words, you don't say that the snake is afraid of people when they're sleeping. Apparently, you're not afraid of a lot of people, even when the people are not sleeping. But we don't say that. And therefore, you do have to be concerned about exposed water. Rav lo shasim be'amra. Rav never drank water in a guy's house. Mashma, that you could drink water if it was bottled water in a guy's house. There's no concern about yaines or anything like that. But he didn't drink water in a guy's house. Amri lo, so here we go. They're not careful about exposure. And you're not supposed to drink water that could be exposed to snakes. But let's say he was in a Jewish widow's house, where a Jewish widow was not as well versed, but he says he did drink. He did drink there. Why? She still follows. She's attached to her husband. Her husband was accustomed not to drinking exposed water, so she would follow that. So Rav didn't drink in a guy's house, but he did drink in a Jewish almana's house. Shmuel Oshasi, the opposite. Shmuel Oshasi, my he would not drink water, or he like Rav, he didn't drink in a guy's house. I'm sorry, Shmuel Oshasi mi be Armalasa, he didn't drink in a widow's house. Jewish Amar Leslie Amsa the Gafra. Her husband's not there anymore. Her husband always was makman, said cover up the water. Her husband's not around anymore, so maybe she didn't cover it up. So Shmuel was makbid not to drink in a Jewish almana's house. But he did drink in a guy's house. The reverse of Rav, according to at this point in the Gemara. So Rav drank in a guy's house. It did not drink in a guy's house because he was concerned that it was exposed. But in a Jewish widow's, he did drink because he knew that she would follow her husband's custom. Shmuel was the opposite. Shmuel did not drink in a Jewish widow's house because he was concerned that she didn't follow her husband's rules anymore. She wasn't afraid of her husband. He was dead. But he drank in a guy's house. Why? They're not makbid about leaving it exposed. That they're careful about cleanliness, about hygiene. So even if they weren't worried about a snake's venom in there, but still, you knew then that bacteria, flies, anything gets dumped in it. Ikadami, some say that the story is not exactly like that, like Rav and Shmuel, but Rav lo shasi mayim b'amra. He did not drink from a guy's house, like we said before. That's true. He didn't drink because they're not makbid. Amir also shasi. So the Ikadami says that Rav is the same. He didn't drink by a guy, but he did drink at a Jewish widow's house. Shmuel lo shasi mayim lomi b'amra v'lo. He didn't drink from either one, not from a guy, not like he said before that that he did drink from a goy because they were mocked without cleanse. He didn't either one. He didn't drink from a goy's house and he drank from an almana's house. Amar Shubalevi, Shal Shion is saying. Shubalevi says that there are three kinds of wine. There are three kinds. There's more than three, but these three, there's no concern about exposure. Again, this manazeh, we're not mocked about exposure. But Rava said that diluted wine, there is a problem of exposure. And diluted wine, there's a problem of yayin nesach. Okay, so even in those times when they were worried about the diluted wine being exposed to snakes, he says the following three cases, there's no concern about exposure because they don't drink this kind of wine. Be'eluhain, chad, if it's a sharp wine, we'll explain that. Mar, if it's bitter, or matak, if it's overly sweet. Like, what do they call that? Malaga? Huh? Manischewitz Malaga. Or those of us from the Midwest, Mogan David, remember that? Mogan David, right? Right. Mogan David Malaga had one cup of that on the first cup on Pesach. You were gone for the evening. You were out. Lights out. So what is chad? What's the sharp one? Sharp one is tilach harifa. That's what it's called. It's called tilach sharp wine. The matzrizik is so sharp that it makes the leather bottles, the leather canteens break open. It's so sharp. Pardon?
It's acid.
Yeah, acidic. Yeah, right. Yeah. Mar, if it's bitter, yarnica. That's what it's called. It's a bitter kind of thing. Again, the snakes don't like that. Matok is chulya. It means sweet wine. Rav says that these three are actually very high class wines for fine schmeckers. These are good wines. Again, they don't drink. The snakes don't drink it, but we're not saying that chad mar matok are bad wines. He's saying they're good. Chad is chamaru pilpulin. It's got wine together with peppers. Mar bitter is afsanin with wormwood. Matok is mei barg. It's called mei barg. It's the name of a very sweet wine. Amar b'shem melokesh. Karina ein bo mishim gilui. If you have this thing called karina, if the wine is karina, what does that mean? It's very sweet. There's no problem with gina. My karina, amarvu chamra chalya. It's very sweet wine. The osimasa came from Asia. So again, it goes in the same vein as Rabbi Shimon Levi that if it's very sweet, they don't drink that. Amarava uvim komo yesh bo mishim gilui. However, in Asia there is a problem. Why? Because that's probably most of the wine that they have there is this sweet wine. And the snakes are used to it, so in that place you do have to. My time, a chamar medino. It's the local wine. That's what the snakes say. That's what everybody else drinks. And Rashi says on a chashim megilbo, the snakes are used to it. Amarava. Last line of the page. Hi chamar de ikram. If the wine started to started to sour, right? It started to sour. Krum is like you can say it's got like a little film on top, like a membrane on top, starts to sour. The first 3 days, when it's turning sour, there's a problem of exposure. And the goyim would use that wine to mikam ba'elach. If it starts to turn sour, as it starts to turn to vinegary, and it gets bad after mikam ba'elach. Afterwards, there's no problem. The snakes won't drink that either. Snakes are very particular, as we see, right? They don't drink that. The guy won't use it also for libation. All right. But in Nardoa, they disagree. I feel even after 3 days, my time is in mikvah. Sometimes they do drink it. So it's very hard. If you're worried about exposure to the snakes, it's very hard to know exactly when you can, what stage the wine is already not affected by the snakes. If the wine is fermenting, again, there's no problem because while it's fermenting, it's no problem. Comment says, how much does that take? Gimel yom for 3 days. While it's fermenting, they don't drink it either. Hashachlayim, if it's a wine that's like in a cress dish, it's made with cress. It's got it's actually a dish. It's a solid dish, but it's got wine in it. Also, ein b'mishum gilui. But again, this is an Eretz Yisrael, but in the exile they were no Yisr. That's only if it doesn't have any vinegar. But if it's got vinegar, migri that deters the snakes from drinking it. Rashi says it affects their palate. They don't like it. That it bothers them, right? So therefore, it affects them badly. They don't like to drink it. Kusach habavli, we've had that in many places in Shas. That's like a mixture of old bread, hardened bread, and salt and oil, and sometimes milk. And, it's made really. It's got flour and stuff like that in it. So that kusach habavli is very strong. It's like strong as vinegar, Rashi says, and it's got like the way of milk in it also. They don't drink it. So we had different opinions of how far you go. It could be, it depends on the ingredients, how they use it. They probably make it in different places, right? He says it's called kusach habavli, mashma. Even in Eretz Yisrael they had it. It's called Babylonian, but in Golus in Babel they were concerned about snakes. Amar of Menashi, even if you say that you're not worried about it because it's got vinegar in it, or it tastes like vinegar, or it's like vinegar, and it repels the snakes. If you see evidence of snake bites in there, you got to be concerned about it. You see the snake. I guess they leave a trail, right, of their fangs that in the dish. Then you have to worry about it. I guess in liquid, there's no evidence. You can't see it.
Didn't we say in another place that the venom of a snake floats on top?
Oh, very good. We're coming to that. We're going to come to that. Amar Rav Barashi, Amar Shmuel. May tif ein b'mishum gil. Let's say we talked about exposure of wine, different kinds of wine, or regular wine, even diluted wine, and water. He says, but let's say the water is dripping in, may tif. It's like tip, 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 tip. There's no concern about exposure there because the noise turns the snakes away. Amar Bashi, v'udav tip, lahadi tif. In other words, it's one after another. It can not just once in a while, but it's boom, 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 like that. The sound, repels the snakes, and he doesn't know what it's coming from, maybe, and he runs away. Amar Barashi, Amar Shmuel. Sometimes when you pick, this is a fig, but also grapes and things like that, there's no problem. When you pick it off the stem, right, there's a little hole there, right? It's open, right? So in that, but you don't have to worry about the snake exposure to the snake there. Kamanki Aitan goes like this. You could eat grapes and figs, balayli, even though in pitch dark. And you have to be concerned. Otherwise, you can't do anything, right? Again, in those days, without artificial light at night, things were blackened at night. Could you eat at night? So Hashem guards the simple ones, and you can eat grapes and figs, even though every grape and fig that you eat basically is open a little bit where it was attached to the stem. Amar Saf from Yeshua de Roma, from Yeshua from Rome. Shloshim mini ars. There's three kinds of venom that Avram just mentioned. Okay, there's three kinds. Shalbocher, if it's a young snake, shokea, that sinks to the bottom. The venom is very, very dense, and the density is strong, and it sinks to the bottom of the liquid. Shalbenoni, a middle-aged snake, mefapea, is suspended. It doesn't sink all the way, but it doesn't float at the top. Shozakein, of an older snake, suf, it floats at the top. That's what you were referring to, Avram. What are you saying? That the older the snake gets, his strength it goes away. His strength cedes, and he loses his strength, because you're saying the young snake, the venom is so thick that it goes down to the bottom. The old snake, it floats to the top. It's mashma that an old snake has no strength. Vatanya, we learned Shlosha calls manch maskin and gvura metosefses ven. There are three kinds of animals that, as the older they get, the stronger they get. Elin, what are they? Dog, a fish. Fish is strong as it gets older. Nachash, a snake. The chazer, and swine and pigs. Right. The answer is koach usufi the kamosif. They're stronger physically. But zire kolish, right? But its venom gets weaker. The animal gets stronger. The snake gets stronger as it gets older, but its venom gets weaker. So that's the answer to that question. So he says it depends on the kind of venom. Now the my nafkamina if it floats or if it's suspended or it sinks. Well, here's a big nafkamina. If, again, you have to know which snake it is, right? You don't necessarily know. If you saw the snake in there, there's no problem. Then you know, right?
ID.
But you ask for ID. The whole issue is we're concerned when you don't see the snake. If you were watching it the whole night and saw that no snakes came in, there's no problem. The problem is you're worried that a snake came in without you seeing it. So he says, the Gemara says, shall bocher shokeh, the one of a young snake, it sinks to the bottom. I'll tell you, at the time, let's say you had a barrel that was exposed, right? It was open, whether it's wine or water. Even though 9 people drank v'lo meisu and they were fine, even though 9 other people drank, don't drink from there. Even 9 other people drank, you shouldn't come. Right? Asiri v'lo meisu lo yishtem asiri. The 10th guy shouldn't drink from there. There was a story like that. 9 people. That's why he tells you the story 9. It could be 8. It could be 20. There's a story, 9 people drank out of a barrel, and they were fine, they didn't die. The 10th guy drank, and Umesi died. In other words, when he got to the bottom of the barrel, he drank from there. That's where the venom was, because there was a young snake whose venom is dense, had sunk to the bottom. That's an example where it sunk to the bottom. Similarly, the same thing with a melon, right? We have the melon. Interesting, Rashi says avatiach is a malafaphone. See, we have many things. You have in modern Hebrew, you go into the store, malafaphone, they give you cucumbers. You ask for kishuin, they'll give you some sort of a gourd or a melon, right?
Zucchini.
Pardon?
It's zucchini.
It's zucchini, right? They call that what they call kishuin is zucchini. That's right. It's that kind of a. So modern Hebrew is different than we find here. Avatiach we call a watermelon, right? But that's also, it could be here. It's also a watermelon. I always say that modern Hebrew is the same. In the Torah, nin is a child. Nechet could be a grandchild. In modern Hebrew, nin is a great-grandchild, right? There's no word in the Torah for nephew other than ben dodo, or ben achiv, ben achoto. There's a lot of words they don't have. Ben dodo is a cousin, but there's no. Anyway, so let's say a melon that was cut open and it was left exposed. Even though 9 people ate from it, and they were fine. 10 guys shouldn't eat from there. My side, there was a story. It happens that way. Why? That's an example where it sunk to the bottom. Let's say water that was exposed. Let's say you have water that was exposed. And therefore you shouldn't drink it, right? It was exposed to snakes. Again, this manaseh, we don't really have a problem with snakes, but let's say it was a time when it was exposed, you're worried about snakes, so you're not going to drink it. Well, can you spill it out in the street? Shouldn't do that either, right? Maybe down the toilet, it's okay. You have to, but don't spill it out into the street, right? Because, Rashi explains, because maybe some guy barefoot is going to walk in the street and he'll get it between his toes and it'll sink in there and could poison him. Also, you shouldn't use it to sprinkle the floor. In other words, in the house in those days, they didn't have tile floors; it was all dirt. So what you would do is like they do in the 7th inning stretch. They sprinkle it down to keep the dust down, right? Or to keep the fast guy on the other team from stealing second. But anyway, as a bias, right? You shouldn't use it. Don't use it even for mixing the cement, right? Why? What's the problem mixing? Again, somebody might walk by there, right? Right? It doesn't say why shouldn't do that. Also, give it to your animals. Don't give it to the animals. The animals could also die from it. Also, don't use it to wash your face, hands, and feet because you might get poison. Some say only in a place in your body where there could be a crack or an opening, an orifice or something. But that's also, but ain't sirta, but it's a place where there's no opening and you have no cut or anything like that. Much you could use it, to wash your back or something. So it's more achem haina Tanakama. What's the difference between Tanakama and achem? Tanakama also said don't use it for your hands, feet, and face. And achem say only if there's an opening there. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. So they're not going to be the back of your hand or the back of your foot. Right? The Tanakhama said, don't use it for your hands, face, and feet. So the Cherem say you could use it for the back of your hand, the back of feet, or the upper part of your face, let's say above the eyes where there's no opening there. Whereas the Tanakhama said, no face, no hands, no feet. Amar Mar, you shouldn't give it to your animals to drink, not your animals, not somebody else's animals. But we said, we have a price that you could, if you had exposed water that you can't drink and you can't you can't put it in the street or put it in a place where people could walk there or anything like that. But it says a price that you could give it to your animals. So we're talking there, giving it to your cat. Cats eat snakes, and cats are not poisoned, right? They're immune from the venom of snakes. Cats eat snakes. So he says that when he says that Bryce says you can give it to a snake, that means they can give it to an animal, your own animal, it means your snake. So why can't you give it to your friend's snake? He says you shouldn't give it to your animals. The Mishnah says you shouldn't give it to your animals. The Bryce says you shouldn't give it to your animals or other people's animals. But a Bryce says you could give it to your animal. Oh, that's like your snake, your cat. So if it's a cat, you can give it to if cats are immune from the snake venom, so why can't you give it to your fellow's cat also? Well, that because even somebody else's, he's not going to die. The cat won't die from it, but it'll weaken him. So the dynamic kachish. So yours will also be weakened by it. How can you give it to him? It says harabari. Yours, you don't mind if it gets gets weakened because you give him some cat food, he'll be fine. So the chavrinami harabari, but your friends also give him some food afterwards, and he'll get healthy again. Zim de boy lezvuna, because maybe your friend will want to sell his cat. Meanwhile, the cat, in other words, your own, you can weaken your cat. You can give it to your cat. If you want to give him poisoned water, you can give it to him. Even though it weakens him, it won't kill him, right? It won't kill him. You shouldn't give it because it's going to weaken him. But if you don't mind, you could. But somebody else's, you can't weaken his cat because maybe he'll want to sell him. Meanwhile, you won't be able to. And interesting that he says you're not allowed. Maybe it's just good advice. In other words, the first part you shouldn't put in the street because maybe you're going to cause injury to somebody. The part about your animal says don't give it to your animal, maybe other animals because you might kill them. Is it a problem? Sar balachayim? Not so much. We saw
when the Gemara, you can never get rid of cats.
That's right. Amravasi, yeah, because you couldn't feed it. Yeah. Amravasi, maybe you could do whatever you want to your own cat. But again, there's a problem with Sar balachayim. I wanted to shoot the cats, to poison them. All that, even the poisoning of the cat could be considered Sar balachayim. Even though we said that when it comes to certain animals, you let them die. You lock them up and let them die, whether it's the chatos, mesos, and other cases that we had. Apparently, it's not considered sar balachayim, because sar balachayim is literally when you're actively hurting an animal that you're not allowed to do. There's three kinds of wine that we're going to talk about this Isser. Now, we've mentioned them before. We're going to say it again now. Yayin nesach, if it was actual wine that was used by goyim in their avodah zarah, it was used in their service, like they libated, and that's what they do. They pour the wine out. They pour the wine out in front of the avodah zarah. Osir b'na, we learned before why, because it's learned out from Zivchei Mesim, and Zivchei Mesim is learned out from Miriam, and Miriam is learned out from the Egla Rufa, right? So that's Osir b'na. So that's really Osir b'na. Umetame to mechamorik b'kazayas. Listen to this. It's metame. If just like a mace is metame you. It's matami to mechamora kazayis. Rashi says masav oel kames, even an ohel. Now, not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody agrees that it's matami ba'ohel. Because Rashi goes that far, but not everybody agrees. We have here yesham shabbos. Right. So not everybody agrees that it's matami ba'ohel. A lot of Mefarshim say that it's matami b'mago b'masa, but not ba'ohel. But Rashi says it's just like a dead body. Just like a dead body is matame ba'oel. You have a kazayas. Pardon?
We don't call it an aviyah.
No, but it's not an aviyah avatu. Yeah, but it's matame like it's matame you. Correct, but it's matame like, according to Rashi, masa ba'oel kames ishkasuvus glames. It's like a dead body and it's matame ba'oel. The other Mefarshim don't go that far, but it's still matame. That's if it's real yayin nesach, he should use libation. Stam yenim.
Liquid and we use kazayis.
Oh, very good. Good point. So if you look at Tosas every Masel umatame, see the Tosas every Masel before Tosas, take a look at that. It's a small Tosas. Afilu beisol the bo revius that says that normally you need a revius. When it comes to a revius of a dead body, let's say revius of blood or whatever, gamin avelus. The Kamar Afksha Nikmu Beisilo Lo Tomer El Revius, Hol V'yochel Likrosh V'lamed Al Kazayas. You need a revius because if the revius coagulates, it becomes a kazayas. Hachamoda, the side of kazayas is not a kazayas of liquid. Notice a kazayas of liquid is less than a revius. A revius, he says over there, revius is matami. Why? Because it becomes a kazayas. Here he says he's more machmer that even a kazayas of the liquid is matami. The whole venesra mitam tekurus matami bekazayas kamozevach, like an animal, like a carbon, something that's holy. So here he says masha. That's why he says tam berevius masba all iskashuas. Now here he doesn't say mitam chamur bekazayas, even though it's not a revius. That's what Tosin points out. Kazayas stam yenim. Now this is a regular ordinary wine. We don't know that they use it for a libation. Like today, they didn't. Wine. If you go buy a wine of Ernest and Giulio Gallo or some other wine, they still have that. That's stam yenim. They didn't use it for avodah zarah. Still asur ba'na. It's still asur ba'na because the gzeira of yayin nesach, even though it's not really yayin nesach, but the gzeira we made that it's also the same way. U'matame tumas mashkin b'revius. This is a very common. It's tame like tumas mashkin. What does that mean? Rashi's mashma that if it came in contact with the sheretz, it becomes tamei. It becomes tamei if you had a shiur of revius. The Tosas, the best, I said Tosas Matamei. There's two Tosas every Matzah Matamei. We learned the smaller one, the fourth one. The long Tosas on Amid Beis has a big problem with Rashi because it's mashma from Rashi that only if it comes in contact with the sheretz, it becomes tamei, and only if there's a shiur of revius. Tosas has a problem with both those things. And Tosas near the bottom says 5 lines from the bottom of Tosas, or 6 lines. There's Zachtum the Stam Yenim. Is Samyan Gozru, even if it didn't touch. In other words, it's Tomei by itself, not just like Yain Nesach. We said if it's really Yain Nesach, it itself is Metame. Mashra Samyanim is also Metame if you have a revius. Because if you touch the sheretz, number one, you don't need a revius normally. You don't need a revius. Anything is tamei. A shear a shear we talk about like a shear of ochlin, like a kibetza or a revius of liquid is from tamei other things. But to makabel tuma, you don't need a revius. So Tosa says nil fashtachtum is sanyam gozru v'af below magasheretz below chmir liksur tuma b'pachos revius. But they were machmer, but they said okay, you need a revius over here because it's tamei by itself. In other words, according to Rashi, it's mashma only becomes tamei if it touches the sheretz. Well, so Tosa says. Any liquid which touches sheretz becomes tamei. Why talk about this here? So Tosfos disagrees with Rashi. So this vision of matami tumas mashma revius is a problem. A third thing, so he said 3 things, right? The first thing is real yain nesach. Second thing is stam yenam. Regular ordinary wine is also ba'ana and it's matami, but it's not tamei like a mess, right? And it's tamei not tamei like b'mago, not tamei necessarily mago masa. It's only matami other ochlim if it is tamei. And according to Tosfos, it's tamei by itself. That's gzeira of tamei. It's not really tamei. And according to Rashi, it's only if it actually came tamei, but it certainly can't be tamei a person. What about that? Let's say you left your wine by a goy in a goy's house. Also, you can't drink it. You're allowed to have an there, but you can't drink it because maybe he used it. That's really your wine. It's not their wine, but it's your wine that you left with him. Are you concerned about it? Yes, you can't drink it, but you're allowed to have an So, right, you're allowed to have an there. If you leave your peiros by a goy, you have to assume that he exchanged them, that he switched them with his. Maybe you like your peiros better, and he gave other ones. L'shviyas l'maiser. And Mepharshim usually say that shviyas l'maiser means that if you hold that even if a guy owns stuff in Eretz Yisrael, but you have to be noig maiser, so that means that even if your peiros were already tithed, you have to assume that he switched it, and you have to tithe these again. You have to give meiser again. And same problem with shviyas. You have to be noig shviyas with them. So what do you see? That you can't rely on the fact. How can you say that so you're saying over here it's also b'shtiyah mutar b'ana, but why don't you assume that they were actually the goy's peiros, right? The goy's peiros are in comparison to gechom l'shviyas l'meiser. In other words, you have to assume that he switched, and therefore it's really his wine. It's his wine, and if it's his wine, it's not yours. It should be also b'ana also, like we said, stam yenam. The answer is Gagon Shiach Lo Karen Zav. It's speaking about where do you say that it's also b'shtiyah, but you're allowed to have anah. That's not like Stam Yanim, where he gave you a corner of the house, he had a locker there, and you locked it up. You locked it. If it was under lock and key or double seal, then why can't you even drink it? If I left it under lock and key and I know it was sealed, then I could even drink it. To Rabbi Yochanan Ikla Parud. Rabbi Yochanan went to this place called Parud. It was the town of Bar Kapara, but Bar Kapara had died already. He was the past rabbi there. The late rabbi of Parud was Bar Kapara. And he asked over there, Amar Klum Yesh Mishnas Bar Kapara. Anybody here? I know this was his town. Did anybody teach me any of his teachings? Tanale Rav Tanchum Dim Par. Rav Tanchum Par taught him this halacha. Hamafki said it's Avkachav Mutter B'Shtia. Oh, he says if you leave your stuff by a guy under lock and key, you're allowed to drink it. So when Rabbi Yochanan went there, he said, "Oh, very nice that they still remember his halachas." Makam shipoleit shamu. The pasuk says, "Where the tree falls, there it will be." Shamu. What do you mean if it falls, there it will be? The tree is going to rot and decompose. It's not always going to be there. What does that mean? It'll be there. So shamu salkadaitach. It's not going to be there forever. Shamu perosav. Its fruits will stay there. Meaning Bar Kapara, even though he's dead, but his teachings will live on in his town because people will carry on his teaching. Same thing. But what do you see over here? You see that if you left it by a goy, but it was under lock and key or sealed or whatever, you could actually eat the peiros or drink them or drink it if it's a liquid. So why do you say over here that you can't drink it, but you could have an off from it, but you can't drink it? Why not? Amar of Zera, Lokash, or Blazer about Samachlokes. Let's say you bought something or you rented the space in a guy's house. You filled it with water, right? And we'll give you filled it with wine rather. You had the key and the lock. Rabbi Lezer says you're allowed to drink it, right? You're allowed to, whether you bought stuff and put it there or you rented space, whatever. But and the guy is still there. But if it was under your lock and key, Rabbi Lezer says you're allowed to. Chum say you can't. Amar Chibra, Rav Chia Bar Nachmani, Amar Chisda, Rav. Amila Amrav Chisda, Amra Ziri, Amila Amrav Chisda, Amali Abba Bar Chama, Hachi Amra Ziri, Halach Gervlas, is like a blesser. So actually, if it's under lock and key, then you're allowed to drink it. Another thing, so why can't you drink it? And there's the brisa here that said you're not allowed to drink it. You could have nobody allowed to drink it. You're not allowed to drink it. That's the Rabban. Rav Lezer holds that you're even allowed to drink it. It was under lock and key, and so you know for sure that he couldn't have touched it. You're clear it was sealed, or you have lock and key, and you couldn't have gotten in there. You didn't have another key or whatever it was, your own lock, whatever. Then you're allowed to drink it. That's the halacha. We'll stop here, and tomorrow and on Sunday, Mirz Hashem, we'll start at the top of Lamed Bey. Sunday's daf, the 3 lines from the top of the page. B'cheres Hadriani. So that in the Mishnah. Shabbat shalom l'kulam.